And we continue at 1:06 in the afternoon. Talk Radio 790 KABC, the John Phillips Show. Mr. Randy Wags in Culver City.
John, last night, L.A. County Supervisor Chair Catherine Barger sat down with Fox 11's Marla Tejas and was asked about the concept of the federal government attaching strings to any assistance that comes to Los Angeles.
That have come along with this and the strings attached with Washington and wildfire relief. Your thoughts on all that?
Strings attached. When we get money from the state, there are strings attached. So I'm not going to get caught up in the strings attached because, quite frankly, nobody should write a blank check.
I agree.
She's the OG.
Quite frankly,
I didn't discover that was a thing until I heard Catherine Barger on with Marla Tejas, and she said it twice in the span of 15 seconds.
Hey, she's our voice on that board. 800-222-5222 is the telephone number, 1-800-222-5222. Fire authorities are investigating the origins of all of the fires that are currently burning here in Southern California. So far, we don't have a definitive answer from fire authorities on the origins of these fires. Some people have their theories, others have different theories. The Daily Mail at one point suggested that some of them could be a result of arson. We know that some arrests have been made when people have been caught attempting to light fires. We know that historically, a number of factors can lead to fires starting here in California, including arson, including people who are being reckless with things like gender reveal parties. We know that there are faulty power lines and electrical equipment that have started fires, including one in Northern California where PG&E was held criminally responsible for it. They knew that their equipment was bad. They didn't fix it because they didn't want to pay the bill. And because of that, I believe it was the Camp Fire in that specific instance was able to work its way across Northern California in very costly and deadly ways. There is a lawsuit that has been filed in Southern California by some attorneys who believe that they do know the origin of at least one of the fires, and they're pinning it on Southern California Edison. One of the attorneys involved in that particular lawsuit is Vache Thomassian. He is kind enough to join us. Vache, welcome.
Good afternoon. How you doing?
I'm good. So you're trying to get to the bottom of just exactly how these fires started.
I think all of Southern California has been living through some devastating days. Unanswered questions and the need for transparency and accountability is evident, specifically focused on the Eaton Fire. We did file one of the first lawsuits against Southern California Edison in order to understand what the cause, what the origin, and also what the accelerating factors were that created such a devastating condition that we're living through today.
Now, so far, the authorities have not pinned the origins of the Eaton Fire on Southern California Edison. Have you been presented with evidence that leads you to believe that they are responsible?
So our office has been contacted by eyewitnesses that have different accounts of what they've seen during the 6 p.m. time period on January 7th, the evening of January 7th, where that devastation started. There are countless reports and online videos that you can see that show that the origin of the fire was at the base of a Southern California Edison transmission tower. You're absolutely correct. A proper investigation will take weeks, if not months, going through Cal Fire, going through the Public Utilities Commission. But it is our contention, it is our belief that Southern California Edison's maintenance of those transition towers was a factor in the devastating fire.
Do you believe that the investigating authorities will play it straight with the investigation? And I say that because if you're just looking at this politically, and the mayor has taken her lumps in this, and the governor's taken his lumps, if it's found out that it was an arsonist who'd been to jail any number of times, probably should have been in jail, that's a real bad look for them. If it is a homeless encampment where residents have called in and said, you need to bust this up, it's a fire threat, do something about it, and they didn't do anything about it, and that's who started the fire, that's a real bad look for them. If it's Southern California Edison, that's probably best case scenario for them, because that is an entity that they're not in charge of. It's not like LADWP, where Karen Bass is in theory the one who is in charge of DWP because it's a municipally owned utility. It lets them off the hook. Given those factors, do you think that you'll get an honest investigation?
I think that the folks that are going to be involved in that investigation, from starting with Cal Fire, who will be involved, are top-notch at what they do, and transparency is going to be incredibly important. That's why the judicial process of this matter going to court is going to balance out any potential politicization. The folks that have lost their homes, the folks that have been displaced, the folks that were evacuated, the folks that dealt with the consequences from the smell all the way to the smoke and soot and ash and all that deserve to have answers. But more than anything, those people that have lost everything, they deserve to have 100% truth presented to them and accountability from any huge corporations that were negligent.
Yesterday, we played the sound of the CEO of Edison, who is making himself available to the news, which is typically not what happens whenever there's liability that's been alleged in a public forum. Typically what happens, and I'm sure you know this better than we do, they go into hiding, they stop answering questions, they refer all questions to their attorneys, and they essentially just sit on it and say, all right, we'll have our day in court. Edison is choosing not to go down that path this time. When the CEO made himself available, he sat down with a reporter and they went through all of the allegations, and he claims that they looked at their records, that there was no surges in any of the lines, that all the evidence that they have shows that they did not start the fire, and that they are willing to cooperate with whatever investigators are looking at right now in terms of how the fire started, and they're going to be as transparent as they can. What do you make of that response, that public response, or at least that public claim from Edison?
Number one, very carefully worded, carefully crafted. If you deconstruct the messaging, you won't hear him talk about de-energizing the transmission tower, because the transmission tower is the high voltage. You hear him emphasizing first and foremost that they de-energized a distribution line, right? In terms of actual getting to the crux of it, for the CEO to get on TV to talk about we're not responsible, we're not culpable, stop looking at us, when the embers still haven't been put out, when a proper investigation of the actual equipment hasn't been done, I think is a PR move rather than anything based on the facts and science.
Historically, how has Edison behaved when they've been accused of starting fires? Have they been willing to cooperate with investigators? Have they been truthful with their public statements, or has the opposite been true?
You mentioned it a little earlier. Historically speaking, you're talking about some of the most devastating fires starting from utilities, whether it's the Butte Fire, the Thomas Fire, the Woosley Fire, the Camp Fire. These are not only recent in proximity. You're talking about a matter of less than 10 years. You're talking about huge in terms of their destruction, this being probably greater, and the financial consequences being off the charts. There is a fund that was put in place in 2019 to deal with just such situations where utilities are causing fires. So these are known issues. And when Los Angeles and when Southern California was put on alert about those insane winds that were happening, that should have been even more heightened notice to a responsible entity to do the right thing.
If anything's going to get your attention as a utility, it would be what happened with PG&E and the Camp Fire, when they were held criminally liable for starting that fire and all of the death and destruction that resulted from it. Since that criminal conviction, have you noticed the utilities changing their behavior in any way? And I say that because I know at one point in time, Southern California Edison put out a notice saying that up to 11% of their customers could have the power turned off because they do not want the liability of those live wires, those live lines being operational during heavy winds, where they just said, all right, out of an abundance of caution, we're just going to shut everything off for 11% of our customers. Have you noticed any change in behavior since that verdict in the Camp Fire?
I think that the patterns show that profits are the driving force, and I think that the material losses that have seen as a result of negligence from utility companies speaks for itself. With this particular instance, like I mentioned, it's going to take investigation. It's going to take weeks. It's going to take months. On the public side of the investigation, there's going to be tremendous pressure from Angelenos to have as much information as possible given to them. And the judicial process, the legal process, is going to go through depositions and discovery in order to understand what the root causes actually were.
When fire investigators take a look at these fires and try to determine what started it, how often do they come down with a definitive verdict, and how often do they say we can't determine exactly how this fire started? Do you know? I can't comment exactly on that investigation outcome, but you did mention earlier that there can be other causes, like, for example, arson. But in this particular instance, our eyewitnesses and our ongoing investigation have indicated otherwise. And if they come back with an inconclusive verdict, but you believe in a civil case you can prove that they in fact started it, the fact that they come back with an inconclusive result will not necessarily impact what you do.
Well, there's two parts. There's the ignition of the fire, and there's the spread of the fire. Because utilities like Southern California Edison are also required to maintain the vegetation in their surrounding areas next to their equipment. And so further investigation is going to be needed to show what the condition of the surrounding vegetation was, and did it contribute to the incredible fast rate of spread, and what was a major contributing factor to the level of destruction was the speed of the spread of the fire.
One of the questions that we get frequently is governmental negligence, where we used to do controlled burns. We used to make it so that we didn't have brush that was so dry that turned the state into a tinderbox. And for whatever reason, in the 70s, we decided to go in a different direction and stop doing that. The government is not necessarily the best at maintaining their equipment or of clearing out homeless encampments that they know pose a fire risk. And so listeners frequently will write in or call in and say, well, why don't you sue the government? Why don't you sue the government for negligence? It's really hard to sue the government for negligence for something like that, isn't it?
Right. There would be immunities that would be in place unless there's certain factors that can be shown. But here, Edison acts as a quasi-governmental entity, as a private utility company, because they are serving the public. They are an electrical company. And they fall into a category of a quasi-governmental entity.
Can you explain that? Because it's hard to explain to people in layman's terms, where I guess the closest you can describe it or compare it to is bicyclists, where sometimes you're driving down the road and bicyclists act like cars and sometimes they act like pedestrians. And whenever it is, it suits their needs to be a pedestrian. Oh, I'm a pedestrian. I can do whatever I want on the sidewalk. And when they want to be a car, oh, I can be out on the street and I could turn left if I want to as well. With these utilities, and I'm not talking about DWP, which is a totally municipally owned utility, but an entity like Southern California Edison, that is an entity that is kind of like a municipal utility, but it's really a private business. And they are what they want to be when they want to be.
Correct. It's a privately owned public utility.
And people hear that and they go, what the hell does that mean? You know what I mean?
That automatically should equate in people's minds, driven by profit.
All right. So you filed the lawsuit. What's the next step?
The next step, well, right now what's going on is there's really two main areas of concern for people that are affected by the fires. Number one is their obviously their physical well-being, their health and safety, their dwellings, their homes, and there are countless homeowners insurance and renters insurance claims that are being filed in order for people that have lost everything to get properly compensated, and in order for people that have their personal belongings damaged or destroyed to get properly compensated. And so all of that process is going on, while at the same time litigation like ours is looking to unravel the knot of understanding the cause of this fire, the spread of this fire, and who's responsible. People that are interested in getting more information, there's a website set up. It's called PasadenaFires.com that they can get more information.
Last question before you go. I know there has been frustration expressed by many homeowners whose homes are in these areas, in and around these fires, who are still not allowed to go back to their property. The government is telling them that it's still too dangerous. They can't go back and assess what the situation is. I would imagine that the same thing is probably true around the area where you think the fire started. Is the government allowing you and your investigators access to that specific geographic location, or are they saying it's too unsafe to be at right now, and you're just going to have to wait till they clear it?
The devastation of the fire has hit particularly close to home. We have folks in our office that have been displaced. We have folks in our office that have had their homes decimated as a result of the fire. And so it is very personal. We do not have access to the areas. Like I said, the investigations of the actual equipment, the actual location, those are very tightly controlled and away from us. But we do believe that the investigative process will continue. We're talking to eyewitnesses that are getting in touch with our office on a daily basis, because that's incredibly important to document. Narrative is the reality of the situation. The Southern California Edison folks, they're going to spin their narrative. They're going to do whatever they think is going to benefit them. And folks that saw what happened, understood what happened, need to document that.
Vache Thomassian, founding partner of the KJT Law Group. You can get him online at kjtlawgroup.com. Thanks so much for stopping by.
I very much appreciate it. Have a great day.
Right now it's time for KABC Dependable Traffic. If you'd like to email the show, you can do so at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. That's johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. And Randy, now that we've reached the halfway point of today's show, if you want to continue listening to us after we sign off at 3, that's easy to do.
All you got to do is go to KABC.com, click on podcasts.
Quite frankly,
Go to the Apple Podcast app, iHeart, Spotify, search for The John Phillips Show, hit subscribe. You can download all the episodes.
quite frankly,
You can do a Google on the YouTube or get that handy-dandy KABC app.
quite frankly,
Search KABC AM in the Apple App Store or the Android Store. It's the easiest way to listen live to this radio station.
quite frankly.
And download all the podcasts. That's it. That's the last time I've ever telling you this.
That's your final warning.
And Randy, we're on the move in the Bay Area.
Weeknights at 11, we do the Fix California Hour on KSFO. And guess what? KSFO has moved to a bigger, stronger signal, AM 810, which you can hear at night down here. So set your dials as a preset for AM 810. And if you're driving around to 11 o'clock at night, listen to the Fix California Hour on AM 810.
If you have an insurance-related question, I know a lot of you live in the fire zone. I know a lot of you have been displaced. You've been evacuated. Maybe your home was damaged or burned down. Maybe you're on the FAIR plan. Maybe you're worried your costs are going to skyrocket. Maybe you're worried you're going to get dropped from your insurance company. Whatever insurance questions you have, get on the horn right now at 800-222-5222, or really the top of the hour. But if you want to wait in line to make sure you get on, you can start right now, because we're going to bring on an insurance expert who will be here to answer your questions. A lot of you have been emailing us. We're not insurance experts. We don't want to give you bad information. So we're bringing on someone who knows the answer to many of these questions, and she'll be happy to take your calls, take your questions after the news at 2. at 800-222-5222. But right now we're going through the sound of the Karen Bass press conferences.
And what's been so interesting about this week of press conferences is Karen Bass probably used to think before the fires broke out that she had a lot of allies in the California press corps and the Los Angeles press corps. But even the most friendly organizations, the honeymoon is over, and they are being as tough on her as you would expect a very conservative news reporter to be. To that instance, you look at the LA Times coverage over the last few weeks. They broke the story that the reservoir didn't have any water in it. They also broke a story that there were 1,000 reserve firefighters that were not called till hours after the fires had started. And they published all those pictures of Karen Bass at the embassy cocktail party while the Palisades burned. It's not just the LA Times, though. We've played you fights that she's gotten into with CBS reporters and ABC reporters and Alex Michelson. But usually, John, if I had to ask you, what is the friendliest news outlet around to local elected officials?
Well, it would be a tie between the LA Times, Public Radio, and Spectrum.
Spectrum News 1 is very, 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 very friendly to public elected officials. They get a lot of bookings that we can't get because two things. They'll be very nice and no one's actually watching, so it doesn't matter if you do the interview anyway. You can say they do the interview. Even Spectrum is turning on Karen Bass, and they're asking follow-up questions and pissing off the mayor. This is Spectrum 1's Kate Cagle, who is Mike Bonin's biggest fan. Well, yeah, she is Mike Bonin's biggest fan, and she is real pissed at Karen Bass right now.
Thank you. We're going to go right over here.
Hi, this is Kate Cagle with Spectrum News 1. I have a
Kate
question.
Cagle. Excuse me, not Cagle.
Hi, this is Kate Cagle with Spectrum News 1. I have a question for Mayor Bass. What was your involvement in emergency preparation in the decision not to deploy up to 1,000 available firefighters last week, given that the National Weather Service was warning about this life-threatening and destructive windstorm? This is in regarding to the reporting in the Los Angeles Times.
I will let Chief Crowley answer that.
No.
No. Right now, everyone in California, all the electeds from Newsom on down, they're blaming Karen Bass. And what Karen Bass is going to try to do is deflect the blame and send it over to the fire chief.
And that's not going to work. We're going to play you the fire chief's response, but then we're going to most importantly play you when the reporter from Spectrum says that's not good enough.
I want to be very, very clear in this answer. And also offer additional details after. So being very mindful of everybody's time. I want to make sure.
She's been hanging around Gavin too much.
I can tell.
Details after. So being very mindful of everybody's time. I want to make sure that you get the information that you need. In regard to the LAFD's position and pre-positioning of our resources, we followed the system in place. The system in place looks at the overall weather and risk. With that,
there's a siren in the background.
Yeah, you can tell.
It is downtown LA.
With that,
maybe that's that fire on Figueroa.
There's always a siren.
With that, we pre-deployed the resources in very, very calculated ways throughout the city, also not knowing where a fire might start and might not start. I think that's very, very important that everybody understands that. Also, knowing that there was a higher risk than normal in a very high fire, type of a scenario. 5 additional engines were pre-deployed on top of what we normally would do.
I love that there was all this preparedness and Karen Bass still decided I can be in Africa.
Oh, yeah, at a cocktail party, no less.
But again, out of respect for everybody here, I'd like to offer...
Because it was more important to be part of Biden's delegation to the inauguration of the Ghanan president than do your actual job that you are paid very well for.
It's typically vice presidents that go on trips like that, and that's what she wishes she was.
But again, out of respect for everybody here, I'd like to offer very detailed information to share with everybody as to what and how we pre-deployed and what came into the decisions that we made on that day and then following the fire. I'll be available right after, okay?
And we're going to have...
I'm gonna boost her volume a little bit because once again they took the microphone out of Kate Cagle's hand so she couldn't ask a follow-up. But for once, the reporters aren't playing that game and they're asking the follow-ups anyway.
And we're gonna have
Mayor Bass, because as mayor of the city, doesn't the buck stop with you as far as emergency preparedness and preparing for the wind event that was forecasted?
The buck always stops with me, but I think you received your answer from the chief.
Whoa! The kitty likes to scratch.
She does not come off well in these press conferences.
No, and I want to go back to a point you made earlier where you talked about the 3 friendliest press organizations to City Hall. It's really 4 because we should throw KNX in there. It's the LA Times, it's Public Radio, it's Spectrum, and it's KNX. And Spectrum is in a different place than some of those organizations because Spectrum is not necessarily a partisan organization. They're a left-wing organization. And there's a difference between the two. They're the ones that love Mike Bonin and Ulysses Hernandez and Kenneth Mejia, the controller, all the DSA types, the Democratic Socialists of America. Those are the people who were really the heroes in those newscasts. Those are the people who were put up on the pedestal. Those are the people who are regarded as the statesmen. What you have playing out right now with blood in the water around Karen Bass, she's going to take it from both sides. She's taking incoming fire from her left and from her right. Everyone talks about how Rick Caruso will likely either fund a recall of Karen Bass and then hope to win the mayor's office after she's recalled, or will run against her when she runs for re-election in 2026. But he's not the only one who's kicking tires on doing that. So is Kenneth Mejia, the socialist controller for the city of L.A. He's upset with Karen Bass over the cuts to fire, but for strange reasons, right, Randy?
So Kenneth Mejia has been very critical of Karen Bass. When Karen Bass and Gavin Newsom were screaming disinformation, the fire budget wasn't cut, it was Kenneth Mejia who posted actual spreadsheets of the budget being cut. But his argument is that true, the fire department should not have been cut, but his issue was with why it was cut. Every department got a cut so they could fund bonuses for LAPD recruiting because LAPD has a historic staffing shortage. And Kenneth Mejia, much like Ulysses, much like Hugo, much like the crew at Spectrum One, are anti-LAPD. So he was upset about the fire budget being cut, which is true, but his issue was the police budget should have been cut instead.
Yes. So Spectrum News and some of those other organizations could ultimately end up turning on Karen Bass. They won't get behind Rick Caruso. They'll get behind Kenneth Mejia. But if you're like me and you want Rick Caruso to be the next mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass taking incoming fire from the left will help you get there.
It's going to be this seemed like a very dull, easy re-election in 2026 for Karen Bass. It doesn't look like that anymore, and there's a very potential reality. I don't know if it will happen, but if you get 180,000 pissed off people in Los Angeles, they can sign a petition for a recall. That's all you need.
Yes. Now, I'm not sure which one is preferable. If recalling her from office, because we have to go through the charter. I think if she gets recalled from office, the city council gets to appoint a replacement. I don't necessarily think it's going to be like what would have happened with the Newsom recall, where everyone had to put their name on the ballot. I'm not sure it works that way. So we'll have to get clarity on that. If the city council gets to appoint her replacement, it's going to be someone just as bad, if not worse. So then we're better off just waiting until the next regularly scheduled election, put all of our effort and all of our time into that to make sure she's replaced by Caruso so there's improvement in that office.
And if that's the way it goes, that primary is a little over a year away, which is not a lot of time. So whoever's announcing is going to be announcing soon, probably as soon as this disaster is done with.
Oh, and then it's going to turn into the Hunger Games.
Well, it'll be great for our budget. Kenneth Mejia, we've got ad space. It doesn't all have to be Rick Caruso ads, but Rick Caruso, we've got extra ad space for you.
If you'd like to email the show, you can do so at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. That's johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. And Randy, you're monitoring the mailbag.
Here's an interesting one. This one comes from Reese in West Hills at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. Hey, John and Randy, I'm curious about California's gas appliance ban with regards to all these homes that now need to be rebuilt. As of January 1st, 2023, new homes and buildings that are constructed will require electric supply panels and circuitry to support all electric appliances and heating under building codes approved in 2021 by the California Energy Commission. In addition to the electric power hookup requirement, the new requirement requires solar panels and EV charging ports in all new homes. So are they even going to put in gas for all of the homes they have to rebuild?
That's a good question. You would think if you're trying to streamline things, you'll grandfather everything that was part of the original house in, but that's not necessarily how they think.
Is this some of the red tape Gavin is going to cut through or not? Because there are going to be a whole lot of people who supported this that are going to be very upset if people are going to try to build their original plans because those plans are outdated.
All right. We receive a number of emails from you, a number of calls asking very specific questions about insurance policies. What's going to happen if, fill in the blank. Randy's not an insurance expert. I'm not an insurance expert. We don't have the answers to many of those questions. Our next guest does. She's an insurance commissioner at the County of Los Angeles, and she's here to answer questions about insurance. If you have one, if you've been impacted by the fire, if you've been dropped by your insurance company, if you think you might be dropped by your insurance company, if you have the FAIR plan, whatever questions you have, now's your time to ask at 800-222-5222, 1-800-222-5222. Your calls coming up right here on The John Phillips Show. Talk Radio 790 KABC.